St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Jackson, Mississippi, is an historically Black congregation organized in 1883. Several former slaves were among its first members. For years, it housed the Fanny Johnson Memorial Clinic, a place where people in Jackson could receive free medical care regardless of race, socioeconomic status, or beliefs. Civil rights meetings were held in its buildings during the 50s and 60s. Then in the 1970s, after the medical clinic had moved to another location, St. Mark's noticed that there were very few child care options for working families in their neighborhood. So the people of St. Mark's established one of the first child care centers in that part of Jackson. Eventually, they joined with several other churches to build a state-of-the-art educational facility for young children, for children all over Jackson. With the child care center no longer on its campus and now being run by several churches, St. Mark's faced a decision. Should they, as so many other churches were doing, move to a different part of town or even to a suburb where crime was lower and church families more populous? In other words, should they move out of the wilderness of the inner city and into the promised land of the suburbs? The parishioners chose to stay put. A homeless person died when an abandoned house caught on fire, and the concern of the people of St. Mark's drove them to explore affordable housing options in the neighborhood. Several years later, public housing units sprung up on the church grounds of St. Mark's. When I visited St. Mark's back in 2010, this fairly small congregation with an average Sunday attendance of only 40 had already identified a next possible ministry. Many homeless people trekked along the sidewalk in front of St. Mark's each day, and they were on their way from a homeless shelter to a soup kitchen. What if the people of St. Mark's set up a center for them to learn a skill or to access the internet for a job search? It seems to me that the people of St. Mark's aren't so much interested in getting out of the wilderness themselves as they are in accompanying those who remain in the wilderness of illness, oppression, poverty, or homelessness. Sometimes it is not our disobedience that leads us into or keeps us in the wilderness, but our faithfulness. In today's gospel reading from Matthew, we find that Jesus was led into the wilderness by the Holy Spirit. That one phrase exposes the lie that is so prominent in much of North American Christianity. The lie that if we love God and are faithful, then we will be blessed with wealth and good health and all other wonderful things. That's the prosperity gospel. It's not the gospel of Jesus. The Spirit can lead us into the wilderness, and once we're there, we almost always find ourselves tempted. The problem is that temptation usually comes to us disguised as something reasonable and good. So we convince ourselves it's okay. Why not turn stones into bread? After all, there are a lot of hungry people in the world. Is it really such a bad thing to jump from the temple and let angels catch you? It doesn't sound much different from handling snakes in church so that everyone can see your faith. And having dominion over all nations, well, we know that leaders have the power to bring about good as well as evil. So why wouldn't we give into temptation if we convinced ourselves that doing so would ultimately lead to something good? And that's what sin is, most sin, at its core. Wanting something good in the wrong way. That is the sin of Adam and Eve. They want to have knowledge, to live forever, to be secure, and to be empowered. Isn't that what we all want? And God was planning to give them all of that and more. After all, God made humankind to be in relationship with God, to walk in the garden at dusk, to grow in their knowledge of the world and in their likeness to God as they grow in relationship to the one who created them. But Eve and Adam become impatient and distrustful, and they give in to the temptation to try to get exactly what they were created for, but in another way than the one that God intended. But as St. Paul says in our epistle reading, Jesus did things differently. Jesus did end up doing and gaining in some way all the things that Satan offered him. He just didn't go about it in the same way and for the same reasons that Satan commanded. Turn these stones into bread, Satan said. Instead, Jesus fed a crowd of 5,000 with just 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. Do a flashy miracle, Satan said. Throw yourself down from the top of the temple and let the angels catch you. Instead, Jesus became so known for his miraculous acts of healing that people came in droves to see him. Worship me and I'll give you all the nations of the world, Satan said. Instead, Jesus disrupted an oppressive empire, but from the bottom up. And millions of Christians over the years have professed, at least with their mouths, loyalty to Jesus over loyalty to earthly leaders. Jesus embodied all the power of God, all the good gifts of God. It just didn't look the way that Satan tried to convince him it should. Jesus brought the kingdom of heaven to earth not by claiming power for himself, not by avoiding difficult and painful situations, not by being a lofty God removed from our human beauty and our human pain. Jesus used his power for and in solidarity with the sick, the poor, and the oppressed. Being a Christian is not about escaping suffering, pain, or anything else that marks a human life. It's about being faithful in the midst of it all and remembering what the power of God does and does not look like in the world. Remembering how true power is used and who it is used for. We will always be tempted, always feel the tug to use our power for ourselves. Maybe that's just part of life in the wilderness. But our journey through the wilderness can become the path to faithfulness. And that's what we see in the life of Jesus. Jesus spent his whole life, not just 40 days, but his whole life, wandering through one wilderness after another. The literal wilderness of solitude and wild beasts. Also the wilderness of lepers, tax collectors, a Samaritan woman, and other outcasts. The wilderness of a woman with hemorrhages, of blind Bartimaeus, and a child with epilepsy. The wilderness of betrayal, and the wilderness of death. And it was precisely in such wilderness that Jesus welcomed and healed and remained faithful and rose again. Our life journey, like the journey of Jesus, is not so much about finding our way out of the wilderness as it is about how we journey through it. This Lent, we try once again to make the journey as Jesus did, with humility, compassion, and an awareness of our humanity. We make the journey trusting that along the way, angels will tend to us, and that we will find true glimpses of heaven even in that wilderness.